The United States government carries a debt of $37 trillion, more than any nation in history, surpassing the total economic output of the world just 2 decades ago. And here's the part most Americans don't realize. They are not planning to pay it back. Not through austerity, not through higher taxes, not even through default. They are planning to erase it, quietly, invisibly, strategically, through a calculated erosion of purchasing power, through the slow theft of value from every dollar you hold. And the instruments of this financial sleight of hand? Not traditional bonds, not tax reforms. Crypto and gold, the very assets most people assume exist outside the government's reach. You are about to witness the United States execute what could be the most sophisticated debt elimination strategy ever attempted. They are quietly building a parallel financial system, amassing strategic reserves in Bitcoin and gold, poised to revalue these assets exponentially. And when that revaluation occurs, the math will technically erase a debt that, by all conventional measures, is unpayable. Here's the part that should terrify you. As the value of Bitcoin and gold rises, the dollar falls. Every dollar you hold loses purchasing power. Every bond you own becomes worth a fraction of its nominal value. Your savings evaporate in real terms, and most people won't even notice until it is too late. This is not speculation, this is history repeating itself, and right now the pieces are moving into place. To understand what's happening, we must start with one truth few grasp. Government debt is not like household debt. If you owe $50,000, you must earn, save, or sell to repay it. But governments control the rules, they control the currency, they can redefine what a dollar is worth. They can manipulate balance sheets, revalue assets, and make debt vanish without paying a single cent in real terms. This is called a monetary reset, and it has been done repeatedly throughout history. The most famous precedent occurred during the Great Depression. In 1933, the United States was drowning in debt from the aftermath of World War I and the economic collapse that followed. The debt-to-GDP ratio hovered around 40% and rising. Deflation was destroying purchasing power. Families were losing homes. Banks were failing. Confidence had evaporated. President Franklin Roosevelt acted decisively but unconventionally. Instead of defaulting, raising taxes, or imposing austerity, he revalued gold, not slightly, by 69% overnight. Here's the mechanism. The US was on the gold standard. $1 was literally a claim on physical gold. Americans could hold gold, trade it, and store it outside government reach. But the government needed relief. So Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, forbidding private gold ownership. Citizens turned in their gold to the Treasury, receiving $67 per ounce, the official price at the time. And then came the revaluation. In 1934, the government declared gold's new official price, $35 per ounce. Suddenly, the U.S. held vast reserves of gold worth $6.8 billion instead of $4 billion. A $2.8 billion gain created from thin air. Debt didn't disappear in nominal terms, but relative to gold, it effectively shrank. Within 5 years, the real debt burden dropped from 40% of GDP to 25%. Meanwhile, Americans holding dollars lost purchasing power. Inflation quietly redistributed wealth from dollar holders to debt relief. The people who had surrendered gold at the old price could not reclaim it. They were left holding devalued dollars. History often repeats, but with different tools. Today, the mechanism is similar, but digital. Bitcoin replaces gold. Strategic revaluation replaces executive orders, and the scale is unprecedented. Fast forward to the present, the United States owes $37 trillion, with a debt-to-GDP ratio of 132%. Interest payments alone are $1.2 trillion annually, more than the defense budget or Medicare. By 2027, if interest rates remain elevated, payments could reach $1.8 trillion, 6% of GDP, purely on interest. This is mathematically unsustainable. You cannot tax or cut your way out of this. Growth cannot keep up when debt expands faster than the economy. There's only one path, devaluation. But not through crude money printing, because that would trigger panic, destroy confidence, and destabilize markets. Instead, a more sophisticated approach is unfolding, one designed to appear legitimate, even prudent. The government is quietly accumulating Bitcoin and gold, positioning them as strategic reserves. This is not rhetoric about embracing innovation or restoring sound money. This is about creating assets they can revalue to erase debt on paper, while the dollar loses purchasing power. Consider Bitcoin. On January 23, 2025, an executive order was signed establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, modeled after the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Publicly, the goal was innovation, national security, and leadership in digital assets. Privately, it's a tool for balance sheet alchemy. The US already holds about 210,000 Bitcoin, seized from criminal enterprises, ransomware operations, and failed exchanges. At $100,000 per Bitcoin, this is $21 billion, a trivial fraction of $37 trillion debt. But the plan is accumulation. Over the next 5 years, legislation and executive authority aim to acquire roughly 1 million Bitcoin, not through market purchases, which would spike prices, but through seizures, fines, and strategic intermediaries. The goal: acquire before revaluation. The same logic applies to gold. The US holds over 8,100 tons, worth $731 billion at market price. On the books, these reserves are valued at 400 KTD per ounce, a statutory relic from 1973 giving massive room for revaluation. By legally redefining gold's value, the government can multiply the balance sheet impact overnight. This is the pattern: accumulate undervalued assets, create an official framework for revaluation, then execute. Gold in 1934, Bitcoin in 2027, and gold again in a strategic revaluation. History is not repeating, it is evolving. Let's examine the mechanics of what's unfolding today. Imagine the US quietly acquiring 1 million Bitcoin over the next few years, largely unseen by the market. They don't announce purchases, they don't trigger panic. The accumulation happens in the shadows: seizures, fines, indirect acquisitions. Suppose the average cost is $120,000 per Bitcoin, totaling $120 billion. Now comes the pivotal moment: revaluation. Much like Roosevelt redefined gold's worth in 1934, the US declares that for balance sheet purposes, each Bitcoin is worth $1 million. Overnight, $120 billion of acquisition cost is now officially valued at $1 trillion. That is $880 billion of created balance sheet value without spending a single extra dollar. But this is more than just accounting. Markets respond to signals from the largest holder. When the Treasury declares Bitcoin's strategic value at $1 million per coin, the market inevitably follows, repricing in stages: $300,000, $500,000, then $800,000. The dollar itself is the silent casualty. As Bitcoin climbs, each dollar buys less. Devaluation occurs concurrently. Gold operates in tandem. The US government's 8,133 tons of gold are officially valued at 400 KTD per ounce, but market price hovers around $2,800. If the Treasury announces a revaluation to $20,000 per ounce, suddenly $731 billion of market value gold transforms into $5.2 trillion on the balance sheet. Together with Bitcoin, the government adds $6.2 trillion in asset value, enough to partially offset the $37 trillion debt. This is an orchestrated, invisible transfer of wealth. Your dollars, your bonds, your savings, they all lose real value. But in the public narrative, the government appears solvent, prudent, and in control. It's a modern, sophisticated version of the 1930s gold revaluation, but magnitudes larger. This isn't merely a domestic playbook. History provides a roadmap. Consider the hyperinflation in Weimar Germany, the repeated peso devaluations in Argentina, Zimbabwe in the early 2000s, or Venezuela in the 2010s. In each case, government debt was mathematically unpayable. The solution was simple in principle: inflate it away. The currency collapses, savers lose, but the state survives. The US is now attempting the same, but with precision, legal cover, and global optics. By linking revaluation of Bitcoin and gold to debt reduction, the government avoids overt money printing while accomplishing the same effect. Internationally, this strategy intersects with global tension. BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, have been quietly accumulating gold, seeking alternatives to dollar dominance. China's official gold holdings exceed 2,300 tons, with unofficial estimates suggesting 4,000 to 6,000 tons. Russia holds over 2,300 tons. India continues to acquire strategically. These nations anticipate a monetary reset, positioning themselves for a post-dollar world. The US, aware of these global shifts, must execute with both domestic precision and international signaling. When the Treasury revalues gold to $20,000 per ounce, markets globally will recalibrate. It's not unilateral. It's an implicit coordination across nations facing the same debt crisis. Every government seeks to reduce debt burdens while avoiding default. This isn't conspiracy, it is survival strategy. Here's how the timeline is likely to unfold. 2025. Accumulation phase. Bitcoin is quietly acquired. Gold remains static on the books, but narrative and public policy begin to prime for its revaluation. Citizens may hear talk of sound money, strategic reserves, and partial gold backing. 2026 crisis phase. Political gridlock, bond market stress, rising yields, and publicized debt ceilings create a crisis narrative. Extraordinary measures are justified, precisely the environment in which the government can execute what would be impossible under normal circumstances. The crisis is the catalyst, the excuse for action. 2027 revaluation phase. Bitcoin is officially valued at $1 million per coin. Gold is revalued to $20,000 per ounce for balance sheet purposes. Officially, the messaging is about restoring confidence, stabilizing the dollar, and demonstrating financial leadership. Unofficially, the debt is dramatically reduced in real terms, while the dollar collapses in purchasing power. 2028-2030 stabilization phase. The market absorbs the new valuations. Bitcoin stabilizes between $500,000 and $800,000. Gold between $15,000 and $18,000. The dollar's purchasing power settles at a new, lower equilibrium. Those holding hard assets retain wealth. Those holding dollars or bonds experience massive erosion. The wealth gap widens, the middle class shrinks further. The consequences are tangible. Imagine holding $100,000 in savings today. Post-reset, with 20% annual real inflation and rising food, energy, and housing costs, that $100,000 may only buy the equivalent of $35,000 today. Your real wealth vanishes. Pensions collapse. Bond portfolios evaporate. Wages fall behind inflation. Housing becomes nominally more expensive but effectively unaffordable. The middle class is hollowed out. Meanwhile, winners emerge: the U.S. government, early Bitcoin and gold holders, large asset owners, and foreign governments with substantial gold reserves. Wealth is concentrated. Debt is eliminated, at least in real terms, while those with limited assets are left bearing the cost. It is a transfer of wealth disguised as policy, calibrated to appear responsible and legal. History has shown this pattern. Hyperinflation and currency debasement destroy savings and pensions, but the state survives. The U.S. is poised to replicate this with far more sophisticated tools. If history is any guide, the path forward is unforgiving, but not inevitable. Those who understand the mechanics of currency devaluation can take deliberate steps to preserve wealth. First, minimize exposure to dollar-denominated assets. Government bonds, corporate bonds, and cash are under direct threat. Bonds will be repaid in devalued dollars, reducing real value by 70% or more. Cash, whether in savings accounts, checking accounts, or money markets, will erode under inflation. Only maintain operational cash, enough for 3 months of living expenses. The rest must shift into hard assets. Second, acquire real assets. Gold remains a proven 5,000-year store of value. Physical gold, not ETFs or mining stocks, is critical. Coins, bars, stored securely. These preserve purchasing power. Bitcoin offers a digital complement to gold, more volatile, but with the upside of exponential revaluation. The strategic U.S. reserve indicates potential for massive appreciation. Real estate, productive, income-generating property is another hedge. Farmland, rental properties, and commodity-linked investments track inflation. Third, reduce or manage debt carefully. On the surface, devaluation may seem advantageous. You repay in cheaper dollars. But wages and income are also dollar-denominated. Inflation erodes earnings faster than debt, turning what seems like an advantage into a trap. High-interest consumer debt, credit cards, personal loans, car loans must be eliminated. Fixed-rate mortgages at historically low rates may be retained, but adjustable or high-rate loans should be refinanced or paid off. Fourth, diversify internationally. Wealth concentrated in U.S. dollars is vulnerable. Opening foreign bank accounts, investing in stable currencies, Swiss franc, Singapore dollar, Norwegian krone, mitigates risk. International real estate and stocks provide alternative revenue streams and protect against a collapsing dollar. Fifth, develop skills, knowledge, and community networks. When currencies collapse, tangible skills and social capital gain disproportionate value. Trades, medical knowledge, agricultural expertise, and repair skills become survival tools. Connections with resource-rich communities, access to land, and cooperative networks enhance resilience. History demonstrates that currency collapse often triggers social instability. Preparation is essential. Now, a warning, this is not fair, it is not moral. The 2027 reset, orchestrated through asset revaluation, constitutes legal theft on a massive scale. Citizens, savers, retirees, bondholders will bear the cost while governments and asset holders profit. Yet morality alone does not preserve wealth. Outrage without action leads to destruction. Awareness, strategic positioning, and adaptability are the only defenses. This is the reality of power. Governments prioritize survival over principle. History shows it repeatedly. Roosevelt's gold confiscation, Weimar hyperinflation, Argentina, Zimbabwe. all demonstrate a consistent pattern. The currency is destroyed, debt is erased, and ordinary citizens absorb the consequences. In today's context, Bitcoin and gold are not mere investment opportunities. They are shields against an inevitable financial rebalancing. Those who recognize the signals and act now will survive. Those who hesitate may face ruin. Consider the patterns. Weimar Germany, 1920s. War reparations created unpayable debt. The government printed marks. Hyperinflation destroyed the middle class. Debt vanished. Argentina, multiple decades. Chronic fiscal imbalance led to peso devaluation. Savings evaporated, but state debt was reduced. Zimbabwe, early 2000s. Excessive money printing rendered the Zimbabwean dollar worthless. Government obligations disappeared. Venezuela, 2010s. Hyperinflation eliminated debt burden. Poverty soared. Social systems collapsed. The script is consistent. When debt exceeds what can be repaid through taxation, growth, or spending cuts, the state devalues the currency. The mechanism evolves from paper marks to gold revaluation to digital assets. But the effect is identical. Ordinary citizens lose purchasing power, governments survive, and wealth is transferred. The US is executing this with unprecedented sophistication. It's not called money printing, it's called strategic reserve revaluation. It's not called currency debasement, it's called gold-backed dollar restoration. Legal, deliberate, and almost invisible. The outcomes, however, remain starkly similar. Savers and fixed income holders are wiped out, while the state, asset holders, and early adopters benefit. When the reset occurs, the consequences will be brutal but predictable. The winners are clear: the U.S. government. By revaluing assets, it reduces the real debt burden from $37 trillion to a fraction, preserving solvency without defaulting. Political leaders avoid unpopular spending cuts or tax increases. Early Bitcoin holders. Those who acquired Bitcoin before the strategic revaluation stand to see exponential gains. A $30,000 purchase today could soar to $1 million per coin. Gold holders. Investors who acquired gold at historical lows will see similar windfalls as official valuations rise. Foreign governments with gold reserves, China, Russia, India, they all benefit. Their holdings are revalued and debt burdens decline without default. The wealthy with diversified assets, stocks, real estate, commodities, they gain in nominal value, preserving wealth even as the currency collapses. The losers are equally predictable. Middle-class Americans, savings accounts, fixed income investments, pensions, they all lose substantial real value. Purchasing power evaporates. Real wages fall far behind inflation. Bondholders, U.S. Treasuries and corporate bonds repayable in devalued dollars become almost worthless in real terms. Pension funds collapse under the weight of worthless bonds. Renters and low-income families. Housing costs soar, energy and food prices skyrocket, wages lag, and everyday life becomes increasingly unaffordable. Small businesses. Unable to adjust prices quickly enough, margins collapse. Many fail under the strain of runaway inflation. This is not theory, it is the inevitable outcome of the mechanics we've seen repeatedly throughout history. The middle class becomes collateral damage, and the wealth gap explodes. The American dream, once tied to the dollar's stability, is destroyed. To understand the mathematics, gold revaluation to $20,000 per ounce from $2,800 represents an 85% loss in dollar purchasing power relative to gold. Bitcoin revaluation from $100,000 to $1 million represents a 90% decline in dollar value relative to digital assets. Real inflation could hit 20 to 30% annually, with spikes in food, energy, and housing prices reaching multiples of current costs. $100,000 in savings today may only buy $35,000 worth of goods post-reset. The dollar survives nominally, but its power as a store of value collapses. The debt, once an existential threat, is now mathematically manageable. The public absorbs the cost. The government survives. It is theft, yes, but legal. It is extraction, yes, but framed as policy. It is deliberate, but invisible until it is too late. 2025. Accumulation phase. Quiet acquisition of Bitcoin through seizures, fines, and indirect purchases. Gold narrative builds. Individuals can begin hedging now. 2026. Crisis phase. Debt ceiling debates, bond market stress, and rising yields create justification for extraordinary measures. Volatility spikes. Hard assets remain your shield. 2027 revaluation phase. Bitcoin officially valued at $1 million per coin. Gold revalued to $20,000 per ounce. Market follows, the dollar collapses, inflation explodes. Savers destroyed, government debt reduced. 2028-2030. Stabilization phase. New equilibrium established. Bitcoin stabilizes at $500,000 or $800,000. Gold at $15,000 or $18,000. Dollar purchasing power permanently lower. Hard asset holders survive. Dollar holders lose 70% or more of real wealth. The timeline is no longer hypothetical. Executive orders are signed, legislation is proposed, narrative framing is set. The reset is visible if you know where to look. This is a story about power. Governments, unburdened by the need to earn money, control the levers of value. Citizens, tied to wages and savings, bear the risk. History shows that those who adapt survive. Those who cling to principle without preparation perish financially. The U.S. is executing this with extraordinary precision. Strategic reserves, revaluation, crisis justification, narrative framing, all designed to obscure the mechanism while delivering a predictable outcome. The lessons are clear. Awareness alone is insufficient. Adaptation and strategic positioning are essential. Hard assets, international diversification, skill development, and community networks are not optional. They are survival tools. This is not fear-mongering, it is historical logic applied to modern tools. Bitcoin and gold are not mere investments. They are shields against the coming financial recalibration. The 2027 reset is not just a domestic U.S. story. It has global consequences. The dollar has ruled as the world's reserve currency for decades, but cracks have been widening. Other nations are preparing for the inevitability of a post-dollar era. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, have been quietly constructing alternatives. Gold accumulation, alternative payment systems, and digital currency strategies signal that these countries are preparing for a monetary reset. Their motivation is clear: reduce dependence on a U.S.-dominated financial system, protect national wealth from devaluation, and position for geopolitical leverage. China, for instance, officially holds over 2,300 tons of gold, with analysts estimating between 4,000 and 6,000 tons. Russia's reserves exceed 20,300 tons. India continues its aggressive purchases. By the time the U.S. revalues gold, these nations will see their own holdings increase in value, and their debt burdens decline in real terms. The interplay between nations is delicate. The U.S. can declare gold at $20,000 per ounce, but the global market will settle somewhere between the announced valuations of major powers. This is a coordinated, though implicit, global recalibration. Each government faces the same challenge: unsustainable debt levels. Each seeks the same solution: currency devaluation through strategic asset revaluation. History tells us this alignment is not accidental. From the post-World War I reparations to the Bretton Woods agreements, nations have repeatedly coordinated monetary policy, sometimes overtly, sometimes in parallel. The reset of 2027 is another chapter in this ongoing story of financial power and survival. This is a story about more than debt. It is about control. It is about how money, our measure of labor, our store of value, our promise to ourselves, can be manipulated by those with the power to redefine it. The lessons are both practical and philosophical. Money is not absolute. Its value is a reflection of collective belief, underpinned by the policies of those who control its creation. Power is deliberate. Governments act to preserve themselves. Citizens are often collateral. History repeats because the logic of survival is immutable. Adaptation is necessary. Knowledge alone is insufficient. Wealth preservation, diversification, and skill cultivation are essential to navigate a world where currency can be recalibrated overnight. In 1933, Roosevelt used gold to erase debt and stabilize a collapsing economy. In 2027, the U.S. may use Bitcoin and gold to achieve a similar outcome, but on a far larger, more sophisticated scale. For the average citizen, this is both warning and opportunity. To ignore the signals is to surrender to history's pattern. To act, to acquire hard assets, diversify internationally, and cultivate resilience is to participate in your own survival. The story of money is the story of power. The story of power is the story of those who control it and those who are controlled by it. The 2027 reset is coming. It is deliberate, visible to those who know where to look, and inevitable in its logic. The only question is which side of history you will be on. Minimize dollar exposure. Bonds and cash are vulnerable. Acquire gold and Bitcoin. Physical and secure holdings are essential. Invest in productive real estate and commodities. Inflation-protected assets matter. Reduce high-interest debt and manage fixed-rate mortgages strategically. Diversify internationally and cultivate foreign revenue streams. Build skills and community networks to survive social and economic instability. History does not forgive ignorance. Those who see, understand, and act will survive. Those who ignore the signals will be swept aside. The choice ultimately is yours. The 2027 reset is not speculation. It is visible policy. It is deliberate. And it will test every assumption we have about money, wealth, and security.